Alright, so I've exported 2 versions of this map, so I want to show you guys how to apply these. Really quick, I did just want to go over, so, I mean, it's pretty much the same deal for exporting maps. So we have our sculpted base mesh, and we have our original base mesh. So I've exported a version for both the original mesh and the new mesh. And I'll show you some of the differences between them. Sometimes I do, depending on how aggressive the sculpts I am. Like the horns are pretty aggressive, I'll just export a new mesh for that. Or ideally would model the horns in separately for sculpting later, but the settings are pretty much the same. Right now I have the midpoint set to 0. One other thing I do want to note is that for that to work as 0, you need 32 bits of information. Having the 32 bits allows you to have basically negative values. So for like, you could have basically blacker than black, if that makes sense. If you turn 32-bit off, then I usually would set this to 0.5, or I guess leave it at 0.5 at the default. That will, however, require you to change a bunch more stuff in Maya, which usually I don't feel like doing, so I like just setting this to 0. Other thing to note is this 3 channels is basically going to just duplicate the red channel over to the green and the blue. It shouldn't be necessary. In most cases it's not. For some reason my maps were being insane without it, so I turned it back on. Haven't found a huge difference otherwise. But either way, I have, and I'll show you the maps really quick. Okay, so here is this is the map that I used for the base head, or like the original head, the not smoothed head, I guess. And then I think it was this is the mesh that I was, weirdly enough, this is the mesh that I was using for the other original head. And it looks a little bit weird. This is one of those strange instances where I think there might have been like some kind of error. I made some kind of change that Maya didn't super like. Here's another one with the mid value set to 0.5, so you can see the background is like 50% gray now. Anything that's recessed is black, and then anything that is raised is white. Anywho, so let me just show you how to hook this up. So we have our existing meshes in here. Just make this temporarily Lambert. So first thing you want to do is just assign a new material. Go into Arnold surface shader, whatever. And I'll call this Disp regular. And I'll turn the roughness down because the roughness is ahead of you. And there's 2 ways to apply a displacement map. You can't do it through any of these settings. So one is to just click this little arrow thing here, this little lower one, and then you want to just map something into the displacement material. And you do that the same way you would a normal file texture. Just keep clicking through until you're able to actually select a file texture. And in this case, I think it was test map? Question mark? And it's getting an error saying it failed to load, but I've been getting that all day and it's been fine, so we're gonna run with it. So much lag. Okay, cool. So you can see now we have a displacement map compared to the default Lambert thing. It doesn't quite look like how it does in ZBrush. I think, like I said, I think there were some issues with how I set up the model, or it's like too extreme of a change. Something went weird with that. But that's the basic premise of how to set up a displacement map. You can also get to the same displacement menus if you don't like using these little buttons. What's this texture called? What do I just name this? Great, great. Very helpful. What did I name this? Oh, apparently it didn't take. New shader. Alright. When you get angry at Maya. So you just click on this and expand it, and then the displacement shader is in this little node. It'll take you to the same place. You can just map it in the same way. So, that's the first one that I did. I will show you on this model, basically, again, using the new map. Because there's like 1 or 2 other things that, let me set this all back to default. Okay, so let me show you 1 or 2 other things of sort of you might need to do with your displacement map if it's not quite picking up enough detail like you would expect. So this isn't a terrifyingly complex sculpt. I just sort of tacked some random horns onto this dude. So a lot of this is going to be a little bit unnecessary, but for more complex stuff, it is usually a good idea to do this. So I'm just going to let that render real quick. And, oof, that's shiny. Alright, so you can see we're getting a little bit of displacement in here. And this is one of the things that I have found to actually be relevant and or important, is to go through and in the displacement file node, change color space from sRGB to raw. That particularly, actually, I didn't do anything to the lower part of the body. But you can see that off the bat, I now actually get the details in the cheeks, like those are showing up now. And then I'm getting the rest of the detail sort of in the horns. And you'll notice that if we look at this character over here, I didn't set the color space to be raw, so a lot of that detail is not showing up. I'll go back and recreate all the changes on this in a minute, but make sure that you do that, especially if you use a midpoint of 0 in ZBrush, because you will then need negative values. So basically any of the dents weren't showing up in this is what was happening. So that's the first thing. The other thing that you might need to do, and again, probably not going to be super obvious or relevant on this particular model, if you're experiencing your model not having basically enough resolution, what you want to do, and this is actually what it looks like unsmooth, looks really crazy. So, like I said, if you make a displacement map for a smooth model, make sure you actually smooth that model, but that's not related. So sometimes you might need to go, if you go into the object shape node, and you're in Arnold, you go under the Arnold tab, scroll down more, there's some settings for subdivision and displacement attributes. So subdivision, sometimes, like, again, if you need a little bit more extra geometry, like maybe if we're looking at this eyebrow area, it's like a tiny bit low res, you like really need to just get up in this person's face for some reason. What you can do is set this to Cat Clark for the type, and that's going to sort of just off the bat add a little bit more smoothing. It's basically like hitting the 3 key in Maya. It's doing that at render time, so it's adding more fake subdivision at render time. 0 is actually not doing anything, so for this to really take effect, you would want to set this to like something like 2 or 3, and that's going to sort of subdivide this more. Again, giving a little bit more fake geometry, it'll sort of a lot of times smooth out a lot of the weird imperfections in a model. It also potentially can make the render time take much, much longer. So I'm going to go back and just set that to 1, kind of call it a day. So that maybe would be kind of relevant somewhere in the horns, perhaps. But like I said, this is not a super great sculpt for demoing this. The other things that you might want to be aware of is under displacement attributes, this auto bump is what it's going to do is basically take any detail that it can't get in through extra displacement and just add that into the bump channel. So you get all the nice resolution without the excessive render times of displacement maps, which is kind of delightful. The height, and I do not recommend doing this. It's just kind of funny sometimes. And oftentimes you'll have to, when messing with height, need to actually restart your render view because it doesn't seem to take effect by default, which is annoying. This will change the height of your displacement map. Really, this is something that you should just be doing in ZBrush or whatever you're making your texture maps in. But if you did want to sort of explode your horns and make them super gigantic, you could do that, I suppose, if you wanted. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that because it actually surprisingly didn't look completely awful. So, shrugs. Only other thing that I want to go over here is the bounds padding. So right now this is set to 0. It's not really doing anything. This is where if your midpoint, if your mid in ZBrush is set to 0.5, you need to compensate for that here in this bounds padding. And if you don't do that, your map is not going to display correctly. So for a value of 0.5, you want to enter, for a value of 0.5 in ZBrush, you would need to offset that by negative 0.5 in Maya. And you would have to do that for every single object that you wanted to displace. So just be aware of that. That's why I like just setting the value in ZBrush, because I never have to mess with this in Maya ever again. But it really depends, I guess, on what you're doing with rendering. So just to recap that on this random head. So creepy. I don't know what this thing is. Well, it's a caricature of my face. I don't know what the sculpt is. So I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing. So I'll set this all back to none. In this case, like I said, it's not making a huge difference. We just want to go through and make sure that the file is, again, set the color space to be raw. If you don't set it to raw, it's probably not going to show up. Certainly not correctly, and you can see that now, again, we're getting all the detail and stuff like that in the cheeks. And in this case, the horns seem to be rendering not super ideally. I think this is just a weird function of how I exported the map. And actually, let me look at that map, because I have... Cool. Actually, I think I know what's... Okay. I think I have two thoughts. So I remember looking at this, and I'm like, wow, this looks very bizarrely overexposed. So there's a few things that you can test for this. So everything after this is basically supplemental. I'll show you for grins how to set up a map like this with these values here. But there is one or two other settings that potentially would be useful. So there is an option for bounds padding somewhere. And I'm not going to lie, I always forget where it is. But this is basically... Where is it? Nuts. There's an object... Oh, Displacement Map, perhaps? Okay, so it might be here. I could be going crazy. But there is this option for bounding box scale, and that is basically sort of clipping off part of the model. And this might be one... Actually, what is this? Mysterious button for calculating things manually. Okay, cool. So in that case, that actually fixed a lot of the crazy weird issues that I was having where the mesh was like being chopped off. So do be aware of that. That's under the shape node and displacement maps. That fixes many, many, many things with that map and makes it look way less crazy. There's also more options for smoothing mesh, which is sort of extra, not related to displacement maps. But that is basically this one kind of done and fixed. If I wanted to use my other shader that I had, what I would need to do is apply that extra shader as version 2. And you can see that, I mean, for one, it's calculating these a little differently, so if you watch, the entire face popped up. Like, I had not done anything to the eyes, and now it looks like this person was hit in the face repeatedly. That is because this mid value is set to 0.5, and Maya thinks it's supposed to be a value of black, basically, as do nothing. Whereas we've set it up that a value of 0.5 will do nothing. So this is down here where we'd want to go in under the shape node. Please don't crash, please don't crash, please don't crash. Under the shape node. Okay, there we go. Hopefully this doesn't blow up on me. Alright. Blah, 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 blah. Cool. So we have all the stuff. I didn't really turn on subdivision. I find personally I don't usually end up needing this setting unless you're like zooming really far into your mesh. Anywho. So this is our bounds padding. You would want to set it to -0.5. And theoretically, once you do that, you might need to refresh your render view, which is the most annoying thing ever. I don't know if this is just my computer or what, but that's still behaving kind of crazy. Cool. I'm not gonna lie, I usually just set things to 0, set the mid in ZBrush to 0, because then I just don't need to deal with any of this. Oh, I know what I did, probably. Anyone want to take a guess? As I wander back into my file node. Oh no, color space is still set to raw. What the heck? Alright, here's a new weird thought. No, okay. Sometimes I'll turn off filtering. I don't think this really does much of anything useful. This also might be one of those weird instances where I've just like done so much to this mesh that I don't remember what I did. For the record, if there's going to be an assignment that probably bothers you and or causes technical, this is actually supposed to be down here, wasn't it? That's so crazy. Causes annoyance and technical values, it's probably going to be this one. Setting up displacement maps is generally irritating to me. But yeah, so this value seems to be, it could just also just be my computer is like, I don't know, caching something weird. But in this case, it does seem to be behaving a little strangely, which is, this sounds really dumb, but this is why I just recommend just setting the mid to 0 in ZBrush and calling it done. You don't need to change this for Maya. That way, if you're assigning this to multiple different objects, you don't need to change the bounds padding for every single object. What if I did something really stupid, like assign this like a crazy, bizarre value or something? Either way, that's well said more. Great. Either way, I think that's pretty much all you would need. There's a flip normal video that I also linked that talks about this, and actually shows it working, which for some reason, mine isn't. But anywho, that is basically installing a displacement map in Arnold and the weird settings that you would need to change to have that work.